I can still remember that day so clearly, as if it was yesterday. The day my father found out the truth. It felt like the world stopped for a moment, like time itself froze. I never imagined that something so small, something that seemed harmless at the time, would turn into a moment I'd regret for the rest of my life. We were sitting in the living room, the same room where we'd shared so many quiet nights together as a family. The smell of his favorite coffee filled the air, and the soft hum of the clock on the wall made everything feel so normal. But there was a tension, something unspoken that hung in the room. It was like we were all waiting for something, but none of us wanted to admit it. Then it happened. The words were spoken, and I saw my father's face change, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but then it hit me. It hit all of us. The look in his eyes, that silent pain, the betrayal. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, and in that moment, I wished more than anything I could take it all back. I wished I could turn back time and stop that truth from coming to light. But I couldn't. The damage had been done. I couldn't erase the hurt, the confusion, or the disappointment in his eyes. I couldn't undo the moment I had given him a truth that wasn't mine to tell. As I sit here today, I can't help but wonder, what if I had kept quiet? What if I hadn't been the one to reveal it? Could things have been different? Could he still look at me the way he used to? Growing up, my family was everything to me. My father, a quiet man with a heart of gold, was the rock of our home. He worked hard every single day, never asking for much in return. His love for us was simple, but it was strong. He never said it often, but his actions spoke louder than words ever could. I remember the way he'd come home after a long day, his tired eyes softening as soon as he saw us. It didn't matter how hard his day had been. Seeing us made everything better. My mother, on the other hand, was the glue that held everything together. She had a warmth about her, a nurturing spirit that made our house feel like a home. She was always there for us, always with a listening ear or a comforting hug. She had this way of making us feel safe, like nothing in the world could hurt us when she was around. But there was always a sense of distance between my father and me. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. It was just that we didn't know how to communicate. He was the strong, silent type, and I was more open, more expressive. I needed to talk, needed to share what was on my mind, but he was never the one to open up. I often wondered if he even knew how much I loved him. I spent most of my childhood seeking his approval, trying to do things that would make him proud. But there was always this wall, this quiet barrier that I couldn't quite break through. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes, his brow furrowed, and I couldn't tell if he was proud or disappointed. It was this unspoken tension that lingered in the air between us. I remember once, after I had won a school award, I ran to him, excited to show him. I thought for sure he'd be proud, but when I handed it to him, he just nodded and went back to what he was doing. I didn't know how to react. Was he proud? Did he not care? It was moments like these that left me feeling like I was never quite enough, no matter how hard I tried. Over time, I began to understand that family isn't as perfect as we often imagine it to be. Behind the smiles and the shared meals, there were things we each carried in silence, things we chose not to speak of because speaking them might make them too real, too painful. I started to notice small things, the way my mother would glance at my father when she thought no one was looking, the way my father would change the subject when certain topics came up. It was as if we were all walking around a very large, very fragile secret, and no one wanted to touch it. Then there were my siblings. As I grew older, I began to understand their struggles too. Each of them had their own way of dealing with the pressures of family life. Some of us, like my older brother, chose to bury ourselves in our work, distancing ourselves from home, from our parents, and from the discomfort that lingered in the air. My sister, who was the youngest, often retreated into her world of books and quiet thoughts, preferring solitude to the noise of family life. She didn't seem to mind the distance, but I did. I craved connection, understanding, and maybe, just maybe, a glimpse of what was going on beneath the surface. We all had our ways of coping with the things we couldn't talk about. But no matter how much time passed, the silence never seemed to make things better. It was like we were all pretending that nothing was wrong, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I could feel it. I could feel the cracks growing, widening, but I didn't know how to fix them. As much as I longed to get closer to my father, I realized that I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. There was something about him, something deep inside of him, that he had never shared with anyone. It wasn't just the quiet nature he carried. It was something darker, something hidden, something that none of us had dared to ask about. But it wasn't just my father, it was the whole family. Each of us had our own truths that we kept from each other, our own secrets we didn't know how to share. And so life went on. We went about our days trying to fill the gaps with laughter, with family dinners, and with the small things that kept us going. But there was always that unease, that feeling that something was missing, something important was just out of reach. It was like there was an unspoken agreement in the family. Don't ask too many questions, don't dig too deep, and maybe, just maybe, everything will be fine. But deep down I knew better. I knew that things weren't as simple as we wanted them to be. That truth, that unspoken secret, was always lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come out. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. And I wasn't prepared for the day it would all come crashing down. It happened when I least expected it, like a storm that slowly builds unnoticed until it's too late to stop. The moment everything changed, the moment everything I thought I knew about my family would be tested. It all started with a simple conversation, or rather, what seemed like a simple conversation at the time. My father had been acting a little different that week. More distant, quieter than usual. We all noticed it, but no one said anything. Perhaps we were all too afraid to ask, afraid of what he might say, afraid of the truth that could come out. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The usual banter was missing. My father barely spoke. It was like we were all waiting for something, waiting for him to say something, anything that would break the silence. But instead he just pushed his food around on his plate, his eyes focused on the table, not on any of us. "Are you okay, Dad?" my younger brother asked, breaking the silence. It was a question that had been hanging in the air for days, but none of us had dared to ask it until now. But there was always that unease, that feeling that something was missing, something important was just out of reach. It was like there was an unspoken agreement in the family. Don't ask too many questions, don't dig too deep, and maybe, just maybe, everything will be fine. But deep down I knew better. I knew that things weren't as simple as we wanted them to be. That truth, that unspoken secret, was always lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come out. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. And I wasn't prepared for the day it would all come crashing down. It happened when I least expected it, like a storm that slowly builds unnoticed until it's too late to stop. The moment everything changed, the moment everything I thought I knew about my family would be tested. It all started with a simple conversation, or rather, what seemed like a simple conversation at the time. My father had been acting a little different that week. More distant, quieter than usual. We all noticed it, but no one said anything. Perhaps we were all too afraid to ask, afraid of what he might say, afraid of the truth that could come out. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The usual banter was missing. My father barely spoke. It was like we were all waiting for something, waiting for him to say something, anything that would break the silence. But instead he just pushed his food around on his plate, his eyes focused on the table, not on any of us. "Are you okay, Dad?" my younger brother asked, breaking the silence. It was a question that had been hanging in the air for days, but none of us had dared to ask it until now. My father didn't answer right away. He looked up slowly, meeting my brother's eyes, then looked away again. I could see the weight on his shoulders, the exhaustion in his face. And then, for the first time in a long time, he spoke. I just don't know what to believe anymore." We all sat still, stunned by his words. It was rare for him to admit anything like that, to show any sign of weakness. He was always the strong one, the one who kept everything together, the one we could rely on. To hear him say something like that felt like the ground beneath us was shifting. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, her voice laced with concern. He sighed deeply. "I know you've all been hiding something from me. I can feel it." His voice cracked slightly, as if the words were too heavy for him to say out loud. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. How had he known? Was it obvious? How could we have been so careless? There was a long pause as we all exchanged nervous glances. My father's eyes moved from one of us to the next, searching, asking. And then, in that moment, everything that had been buried for so long seemed to surface. The truth, hidden for years, was about to come to light. My older sister was the one who finally spoke. "Dad," she started, her voice trembling. "There's something we've been meaning to tell you. Something we didn't want to hurt you with." She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between my father and the rest of us. At that moment, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. My father's face remained expressionless, but I could see the shift in his eyes. The fear. The confusion. I could see the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. It was then that I realized how much we had kept from him. How much we had shielded him from, thinking it was for his own good. But we hadn't considered how much it would hurt him when the truth finally came crashing down. I don't think I'm ready to hear it," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. The truth was already on its way, and there was no turning back now. In the days following that dinner, everything felt different. My father's words echoed in my mind over and over. "I know you've all been hiding something from me." No one in the family had ever dared to acknowledge that we were keeping things from him. We had always acted as if everything was normal, as if we were the perfect family. But now the cracks were beginning to show. It was strange how silence can weigh so heavily. For days after that night, no one spoke much. My father, still withdrawn, kept his distance, retreating into his study or spending long hours in the garden. My mother, ever the caretaker, tried to keep the house running as usual, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. She knew the truth, knew what had been hidden, but it seemed like the burden of it all was breaking her too. I remember walking into the kitchen one morning, trying to gather the courage to talk to my father. I had always been the one to seek out answers, to ask the questions that no one else dared to ask. But now I found myself frozen, unable to speak. I was afraid of what I might hear. Afraid of how everything would change if the truth came out. "Are you okay?" my mother asked gently as I stood there, staring at the kitchen counter. She was making tea, the soft steam rising from the cup in her hands. Her voice was filled with care. But there was something else in it too. Something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure. I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if he never forgives us? What if he can't look at us the same way?" My mother paused, looking at me for a long moment. "We'll have to face whatever comes," she said softly. "We can't change what's already been done." But that was the problem. We couldn't change it. No matter how much we wished we could go back in time, we couldn't. The truth had already been set in motion, and there was no stopping it now. The things we had kept hidden from my father had already started to unravel. And as the days went by, the weight of it all felt heavier. It wasn't just my father who was affected. I could see the strain in my siblings too. My brother, who had always been so distant, was becoming more withdrawn. He spent even more time at work, avoiding the house, avoiding all of us. My sister, normally so quiet and introspective, had become strangely agitated. She would snap at everyone, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes. I knew what this was. It was guilt eating away at us. It was the slow realization that we had betrayed the one person who had always been there for us. It was the crushing weight of knowing that we had broken the trust of the man who had given us everything. And it wasn't just the guilt, it was the fear. The fear that once the truth came out, everything would change. That the family we had known, the family we had built over the years, would be torn apart. As the days dragged on, the silence in the house became unbearable. It felt like we were all walking on eggshells, afraid to break the delicate balance that had held our family together for so long. My father, once the steady presence in our home, seemed to be slipping further away. The quiet weight of his disappointment hung in the air like an unspoken question that none of us dared to answer. I found myself growing restless, unable to focus on anything else. I tried to talk to my siblings, tried to reach out, but it felt like we were all trapped in our own worlds, too consumed by our own guilt to communicate. It was as though we were each carrying a heavy burden that no one could see but that everyone could feel. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the living room with my father. He was sitting in his favorite chair, staring out the window at the garden, his face unreadable. I hadn't planned to speak to him, but something inside me stirred, and before I knew it, I was walking toward him. "Dad," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "I know things have been strange lately, but I want you to know that we all love you. And we never meant to hurt you." He didn't turn to look at me. His gaze remained fixed on the outside world, as if the conversation were happening in another time, another place. "I know you do," he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "But love isn't enough, is it?" The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I hadn't expected him to say that. I hadn't expected him to sound so resigned. "We've all made mistakes, Dad," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't want to keep things from you. We thought we were protecting you, but maybe we were just protecting ourselves." He was still silent, still staring out the window. I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. And I knew that no matter how many times I apologized, no matter how much I tried to explain, it wouldn't be enough. Not this time. The trust had been broken, and there was no way to fix it. I wanted to say more, to beg for his forgiveness, to somehow make him understand. But I couldn't find the words. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't turn back from. And no matter how hard we tried, the fall was inevitable. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what had been revealed, what had been hidden for so long. The truth was out now, but it wasn't the relief I had imagined it would be. Instead, it felt like an irreversible change had taken place. A shift in the fabric of our family that couldn't be undone. The next morning, my father was gone. Not physically. He was still in the house, but he was distant, absent in a way that I couldn't quite understand. He wasn't the same man who had once held us all together with his quiet strength. He had become a shadow of the person he had been, a version of himself that I didn't know how to reach. And I couldn't help but wonder, was it too late? Had we waited too long to tell him the truth, or had the truth itself already done its damage? The days that followed felt like they were dragging on forever. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a quiet place of uncertainty. My father, although physically present, seemed more distant than ever. It was as if he was here but also not here, like his mind had left him, and he was just going through the motions of daily life. I could tell that my mother was worried. She would sneak glances at him whenever he wasn't looking. Her face creased with concern, but she never said anything. It was as if she too was waiting for the moment when things would shift, when the weight of the truth would either break us or bring us together. But deep down, I knew that nothing would be the same again. My siblings were also slipping away, each in their own way. My brother, the one who had always been the strong, silent type, seemed more withdrawn than ever. He no longer came home at the usual time, often staying out late with friends or working extra hours at the office. When he did come home, he barely spoke. I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the shame, the feeling that somehow he had failed my father. My sister, on the other hand, had become almost unrecognizable. She used to be the peacemaker, the one who could always make everyone laugh, who could diffuse any tension with just a few words. But now she seemed angry all the time. Small things would set her off, moments when she would snap at someone for the smallest thing. Her frustration was palpable, but she never spoke of it. It was like she was carrying something heavy inside of her, and she couldn't figure out how to let it go. And then there was me. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to apologize over and over again, to beg for forgiveness. Another part of me wanted to distance myself, to pretend like nothing had changed and that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. The truth had already done its damage, and there was no pretending it away. One evening, when I returned home from work, I found my father sitting in the living room, looking out the window once again. He hadn't changed his position in hours, and I could see the fatigue in his shoulders, the slump in his posture. It was like he was carrying the weight of the world on his back, and no one was there to help him. "Dad," I said softly, trying to break the silence, "I think we need to talk." He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. There was something in his gaze, something unreadable, distant, almost as if he were a stranger to me. "I don't know if there's much more to say," he replied quietly, his voice flat and emotionless. "What's done is done." I could feel my chest tighten as I struggled to find the right words. "Dad, please," I pleaded. "We didn't mean for any of this to happen. We thought we were protecting you, but we should have told you sooner." His gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained guarded. "You think telling me would have made it better?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of sadness. "Do you really believe that?" I didn't have an answer. because deep down I wasn't sure anymore. Could telling him sooner have made a difference? Or would it have only made things worse? As the days went by, I began to see the cracks in my father's soul, the slow erosion of the man who had once been so strong. He was no longer the father I had known. The truth, the secret we had hidden from him for so long, had changed him in ways we couldn't reverse. I couldn't help but feel responsible. If only we hadn't kept it from him. If only we had told him the truth when it mattered. But it was too late for what-ifs. The damage had been done. Now we were left to deal with the aftermath of our actions, and I wasn't sure any of us were prepared for the consequences. The tension between my father and the rest of the family became even more unbearable with each passing day. It was as if we were all walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might make things worse. The house, which had once been filled with the sounds of laughter and love, was now filled with nothing but silence. And that silence was louder than anything else. My mother, who had always been the heart of the family, seemed like a shell of herself. She would wake up early and go about her routines, but there was no joy in her movements. She would smile at us, but her eyes, those eyes that had always been filled with warmth, were empty. I could see the pain in her gaze, the regret, and perhaps even a sense of guilt. She had always been the one to hold us all together, but now it felt like she too was falling apart. One evening, as I sat at the dinner table trying to eat, trying to act normal, I looked up and saw my father staring at me. His eyes were searching, like he was looking for something in me that he couldn't find. There was a quiet desperation in his gaze, a silent plea for answers that none of us had the courage to give. "Do you even remember when it all started? Do you even remember when it all started?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and calm but filled with a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. My heart began to race, and for a moment, I wondered if I had heard him wrong. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, afraid of where this conversation might lead. "The moment when everything changed," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "When you all decided it was better to hide things from me. Do you remember that moment?" The question hit me like a wave, crashing into me with a force that left me breathless. Of course I remembered. I had been there when it all started, when the lies began to form, when we all made the decision to keep the truth from him. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him acknowledge that we had made a choice, made it all feel so much worse. I looked down at my plate, unable to meet his gaze. The guilt was suffocating, pressing down on me with every passing second. I wanted to apologize, to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know how to fix what had been broken. I didn't know if it was even possible anymore. "It wasn't like that, Dad," I said finally, my voice trembling. "We thought we were protecting you. We didn't want to hurt you." He shook his head slowly, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You think I don't know that," he said softly. "But protection comes at a cost, doesn't it? You can't protect someone from the truth forever. Eventually it finds its way out, and when it does, it breaks everything." His words stung, but they were the truth. We had tried so hard to protect him, to shield him from the pain, but in doing so we had only caused more harm. We had broken his trust, and no amount of regret could undo that. The room felt colder now, the air thick with unspoken emotions. My siblings were quiet, watching this exchange with wary eyes, unsure of what to say or how to react. My mother, sitting at the head of the table, didn't speak. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on her own plate. I wanted to say more, to explain myself, but I didn't know how. The truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. The damage had been done, and the family we had known, the one I had always felt so safe in, was slowly slipping away. The weeks that followed were a blur of awkward silences and uneasy glances. My father, once the pillar of strength in our family, had become a shadow of the man he used to be. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it was all there, written on his face, but it was buried beneath a calm exterior that none of us dared to challenge. He had retreated into himself, shutting everyone out. Even when we tried to talk to him, to offer some kind of explanation, it felt like he was a million miles away, somewhere we couldn't reach. It wasn't just my father who was pulling away. We all were. My brother, who had always been so distant, had become even more withdrawn. He barely came home, spending most of his time at work or out with friends. When he did return, he didn't speak much. He just sat in silence, lost in his own thoughts. My sister, on the other hand, had grown restless. Her usual calm demeanor had given way to agitation. She would snap at anyone who tried to talk to her, frustrated with everything, with everyone. It was like she was carrying a burden that none of us could see, and no one knew how to help her bear it. I, too, felt myself drifting further and further away from the family I had once felt so connected to. My heart ached as I watched my father, my mother, and my siblings, each of us caught in our own personal struggle, unable to communicate, unable to fix what had been broken. The truth, once revealed, had created a rift between us that we didn't know how to bridge. I thought about what my father had said that night about protection coming at a cost, and I realized he was right. We thought we were doing the right thing, but in the end we had only caused more pain. I had wanted to protect him, to shield him from the truth, but now I saw how selfish that had been. He deserved the truth no matter how difficult it was. But even knowing that didn't make it easier. The truth had created a wound that was too deep to heal quickly, and now we were all left to grapple with the consequences. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I heard a knock on the door. It was my mother. She came in quietly, sitting down next to me on the bed. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I looked at her, unsure of what to say. "What's there left to talk about?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "The damage is done. We can't take it back." She sighed, her eyes full of sadness. "I know. But we can still try to fix it. We can still try to come together. Even if it feels like we're falling apart." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could find a way back to the family we used to be. But it didn't feel possible anymore. The truth had fractured everything, and the pieces didn't seem to fit together the way they used to. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I wondered if we'd ever be the same again. Would my father ever forgive us? Would he ever look at us the way he used to? And, most importantly, would we ever be able to heal the wounds we had caused? It was clear now that nothing could erase what had happened, but I couldn't help but hold on to a sliver of hope that somehow we could find a way to rebuild trust, even if it took time. That it was the quiet after the storm that finally broke me. For weeks, I had been holding on to a fragile thread of hope that somehow things could go back to the way they were, that my family could heal, that the damage caused by the truth could be mended. But that hope began to wither, slowly fading away as the days turned into weeks. And then one night everything changed. It started with an argument, something so small at first that I almost dismissed it. We were all sitting around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared so many meals together, the same table where we'd laughed, cried, and celebrated milestones. But now it was just a place where we all gathered in silence, unsure of what to say to each other. It was my sister who spoke first. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp, almost too sharp. "Why won't you talk to us? Why are you shutting us out?" My father, who had been staring at his plate in silence, slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers. His face was tired, etched with lines of worry and regret. But there was something else too. Something darker, something I hadn't seen before. There was a coldness in his eyes that sent a chill through me. "I don't know what you want from me," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with an edge of frustration. "You've all made it clear that I'm not part of this family anymore. That I'm just some outsider." I felt the air grow thick, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. My father, the man who had always been the center of our world, the one who held us all together with his quiet strength, was finally admitting it. He felt like an outsider in his own home. And the truth was, in that moment I realized he wasn't wrong. "We never meant for it to be like that," my mother said softly, her voice trembling as she tried to reach him. "We thought we were protecting you. We thought it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't the right thing to do," my father interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when you've all been lying to me. When you've all been keeping things from me. You think I didn't know." His words stung, but it wasn't the anger that hurt the most, it was the sadness. The deep, aching sadness in his voice that I had never heard before. It was a pain that went beyond anything I had ever seen in him. And in that moment I understood the depth of our mistake. We hadn't just kept the truth from him. We had stripped him of his place in the family. We had taken away his right to be part of the decisions, to be part of the conversations. We had made him feel small, unimportant. "Dad, please," I said, my voice breaking. "We didn't want to hurt you. We never meant to make you feel this way." But it was too late. He was already too far gone, too consumed by the hurt to hear me. His face, once so full of love and warmth, was now cold and distant, a mask of the man he used to be. And in that moment, I knew that nothing I could say would ever change what had happened. The room fell silent after my father's words. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of his anger, his hurt, hung in the air like a heavy fog that no one could escape. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow as I tried to process what had just happened. How had we come to this point? How had the family I once knew, the family I thought was unbreakable, fallen apart so completely? My father's eyes were no longer filled with the warmth and patience I remembered. Instead, they were filled with something I had never seen in him before: betrayal. And for the first time, I felt the full force of the consequences of our actions. We had broken his trust in a way that was irreversible. No apology could undo the damage. "I think it's time we all had some space," my father said, his voice steady, but there was a finality to it that sent a chill through me. He stood up from the table. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when you've all been lying to me. When you've all been keeping things from me. You think I didn't know." His words stung, but it wasn't the anger that hurt the most, it was the sadness. The deep, aching sadness in his voice that I had never heard before. It was a pain that went beyond anything I had ever seen in him. And in that moment I understood the depth of our mistake. We hadn't just kept the truth from him. We had stripped him of his place in the family. We had taken away his right to be part of the decisions, to be part of the conversations. We had made him feel small, unimportant. "Dad, please," I said, my voice breaking. "We didn't want to hurt you. We never meant to make you feel this way." But it was too late. He was already too far gone, too consumed by the hurt to hear me. His face, once so full of love and warmth, was now cold and distant, a mask of the man he used to be. And in that moment, I knew that nothing I could say would ever change what had happened. The room fell silent after my father's words. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of his anger, his hurt, hung in the air like a heavy fog that no one could escape. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow as I tried to process what had just happened. How had we come to this point? How had the family I once knew, the family I thought was unbreakable, fallen apart so completely? My father's eyes were no longer filled with the warmth and patience I remembered. Instead, they were filled with something I had never seen in him before: betrayal. And for the first time, I felt the full force of the consequences of our actions. We had broken his trust in a way that was irreversible. No apology could undo the damage. "I think it's time we all had some space," my father said, his voice steady, but there was a finality to it that sent a chill through me. He stood up from the table, the scraping of his chair against the floor sounding like a door slamming shut. "Dad?" I began, standing up as well, but my voice faltered. I couldn't find the right words. What could I say? How could I fix this? He didn't look at me as he turned toward the door. "I need some time," he said quietly, "to think, to process." And then, without another word, he left the room. I stood there, frozen, as the door closed behind him. It was as if the entire world had shifted beneath my feet. I could hear the faint sound of his footsteps as he walked down the hall, but it felt like he was walking further and further away from us, further away from the family we had once been. And in that moment I realized something that hit me like a ton of bricks. We had already lost him. My mother was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "What have we done?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked at me, at my brother and sister, but her gaze was empty, like she was searching for answers that none of us had. "I didn't think it would come to this," my brother said, his voice shaky. He had been so quiet throughout the whole conversation, his usual stoic demeanor replaced with guilt and regret. He had always been the strong one, the one who didn't show emotion. But now it was clear that he was carrying the weight of the truth too. My sister, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair in the process. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice cracking. We've destroyed everything. Her words hung in the air, but they were more than just words. They were a reflection of what we were all feeling. Like we had shattered something that couldn't be put back together. Like there was no way to fix the broken pieces. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where my father had sat just moments before. I wanted to run after him, to beg him to come back, to tell him that we were sorry. But something inside me knew it was too late. The damage had been done. The trust that had been the foundation of our family was gone, and no amount of pleading would bring it back. It was in that moment, as I stood there with the weight of our mistakes pressing down on me, that I realized how much we had taken for granted. How much we had assumed that things would always be the way they were. And now everything was falling apart. The next few days passed in a blur, the house feeling emptier with each passing moment. My father remained distant, retreating to his study, refusing to engage with anyone. The rest of us were left to navigate the silence, trying to find a way to move forward without knowing how. My mother spent her days quietly cleaning, organizing, and avoiding the heavy conversations that needed to happen. She couldn't bring herself to face my father's pain, and neither could we. Each morning felt like a reminder of how fractured our family had become. I would pass by my father's study and feel the weight of his absence in the house. The man who had always been the center of our world now felt like a stranger to me. I couldn't help but think back to all the moments when we should have been honest with him, when we should have shared the truth, no matter how painful it would have been. But instead we kept secrets, believing we were protecting him, when in reality we were just protecting ourselves from the consequences. One evening as I sat alone in the living room, I heard footsteps behind me. It was my father. He stood in the doorway, looking at me with eyes that seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. For a moment neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with regret and unhealed wounds. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but carrying a quiet intensity. "You all think I don't know, don't you?" he asked, his gaze steady. "You think I didn't see the way things were changing, the way you all started to keep things from me? I felt it, you know. I may not have said anything, but I felt the distance." His words hit me hard. I had always thought of my father as this pillar of strength, someone who didn't show vulnerability. But now I realized that he had known all along. He had known that we were keeping secrets, and yet, he had allowed us to carry on as if everything was fine. He had protected us as he always did, but we had never stopped to consider how that protection was affecting him. "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, my voice cracking as I tried to find the words to explain myself. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought you didn't need to know." He shook his head slowly, his eyes sad. "That's where you're wrong," he said softly. "You never stopped to think about what I needed. You thought you knew what was best for me, but you never asked me. You never gave me the chance to be part of the decision, to have a say in what was happening in my own life." His words stung more than I expected because they were the truth. We had never given him the opportunity to be a part of the conversation. We had made decisions for him, thinking we were protecting him, but we had only alienated him in the process. I could see now in his eyes how much that had hurt him. The pain wasn't just from the lies. It was from the exclusion, the feeling that we no longer trusted him. For the first time in weeks, I saw the cracks in our family from my father's perspective. I realized how much we had taken from him, how much we had assumed that he would always be there, without ever truly considering his needs or his feelings. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "I never meant to make you feel that way." My father didn't say anything for a long time. "You all think I don't know, don't you?" he asked, his gaze steady. "You think I didn't see the way things were changing, the way you all started to keep things from me? I felt it, you know. I may not have said anything, but I felt the distance." His words hit me hard. I had always thought of my father as this pillar of strength, someone who didn't show vulnerability. But now I realized that he had known all along. He had known that we were keeping secrets, and yet, he had allowed us to carry on as if everything was fine. He had protected us as he always did, but we had never stopped to consider how that protection was affecting him. "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, my voice cracking as I tried to find the words to explain myself. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought you didn't need to know." He shook his head slowly, his eyes sad. "That's where you're wrong," he said softly. "You never stopped to think about what I needed. You thought you knew what was best for me, but you never asked me. You never gave me the chance to be part of the decision, to have a say in what was happening in my own life." His words stung more than I expected because they were the truth. We had never given him the opportunity to be a part of the conversation. We had made decisions for him, thinking we were protecting him, but we had only alienated him in the process. I could see now in his eyes how much that had hurt him. The pain wasn't just from the lies. It was from the exclusion, the feeling that we no longer trusted him. For the first time in weeks, I saw the cracks in our family from my father's perspective. I realized how much we had taken from him, how much we had assumed that he would always be there, without ever truly considering his needs or his feelings. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "I never meant to make you feel that way." My father didn't say anything for a long time. The silence stretched between us, but there was something different in it now, something softer, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. Maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be long, and the damage we had caused wouldn't vanish overnight. But for the first time I felt a small glimmer of hope that we could still come together, even if it was just a small step in the right direction. The days after that conversation were filled with a quiet sort of tension. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation, no immediate moments of forgiveness, but something had shifted between my father and me. The space that had once felt so distant now felt a little less cold, a little less unreachable. We didn't speak much, but I could sense the slight easing of the walls that had once stood so tall between us. But it wasn't just between my father and me. It was between all of us. The silence in the house had taken on a different tone now. More thoughtful, more introspective. We were no longer avoiding the problem. We were facing it head-on, even if we didn't know exactly how to deal with it. I caught moments of my mother looking at my father when she thought no one was watching. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and longing. But there was something else there too. Something that spoke of resilience. She had been the one to hold us together for so long. And even though I could see that the cracks in their relationship were deep, I also saw that she wasn't ready to give up. She loved him. And she was willing to fight for their relationship, even if that meant facing the hard truths they had avoided for so long. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, my father surprised me by turning to my mother. "I don't know how to fix this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to make things right. But I want to try." The words hung in the air, simple and raw. It was the first time in a long time that I had seen him vulnerable, unsure of how to move forward. It was as if he was finally admitting that the family he had worked so hard to protect had drifted away from him. He was asking for help, not just from my mother but from all of us. My mother, always the one to keep things together, nodded slowly. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "One step at a time." There was something so quietly powerful in that moment. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There were no tears, no sweeping gestures. But it was a moment of understanding, of acknowledgement that things had gone wrong, but that they could still be fixed, slowly, painfully, but surely. The weeks that followed were not easy. The tension remained, but there was a sense of purpose in the air now. We all knew that rebuilding trust, rebuilding the family, wasn't going to happen overnight. It was going to take time. But we were finally facing it together, no longer afraid to speak the hard truths that we had kept buried for so long. I started spending more time with my father, trying to reconnect with him in small ways. I'd sit with him in the garden, not saying much, just being there with him. I didn't know how to fix things, but I knew that I had to show him in my own way that I was still here, that I still cared. It wasn't about big gestures or grand apologies. It was about showing up, about being present in the moments that mattered. And as the days passed, I could see small changes in my father. The anger, the distance was still there, but it was lessening. Slowly but surely, he was starting to let us back in, starting to see that we were still his family, still worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, we were starting to see that we were worth fighting for too. It wasn't an overnight change, but slowly, I began to see signs of the family we once were. The one that laughed together, shared quiet moments, and loved each other deeply, even in the absence of perfect words. The healing process was slow and fragile, and at times it felt like we were moving backwards instead of forwards. But there was a glimmer of something, hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that screamed loudly or promised instant solutions, but the kind that whispered softly, reminding us that it was still possible to rebuild. I remember the day my father came to me. It was early in the morning, and I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping my coffee. The house was still quiet. No one else had woken up yet. I had just settled into the rhythm of the silence when I heard his footsteps. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. I looked up, surprised but not entirely shocked. For the first time in what felt like ages, he wasn't avoiding me. He wasn't retreating into his study or spending all his time alone. He was standing there at the kitchen door, looking uncertain but determined. "Of course," I said, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat down slowly, the way someone does when they're unsure of what comes next. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us sure where to begin. And then, after what felt like an eternity, my father spoke again. "I don't know how to fix everything. I don't know what the right words are," he said quietly, his eyes focused on the mug in front of him. "But I do know this, I want to try." It was such a simple sentence, but it carried so much weight. My father, the man who had always been so strong and unshakable, was admitting that he didn't have all the answers, that he was willing to work through the mess step by step, that he wanted us to heal as a family. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that maybe, just maybe, things could still be okay. "I want to try too," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I want to make things right." There was a long pause before he looked up at me, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with so much emotion, so much pain, but also something else, the willingness to move forward. Slowly, carefully, we started to talk. Not about the secrets, not about the lies, but about everything else. The things we had never said. The small moments that had been lost in the chaos of everything else. We began, awkwardly at first, to reconnect. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We didn't fix everything in that conversation. In fact, the process of healing was far from finished. But that was the point. It was never about one conversation or one grand gesture. It was about showing up. It was about trying even when it felt impossible. From that day forward, there was a shift in the air. We didn't have all the answers, and we didn't have a clear path forward. But we had something that felt more important. A willingness to try. A willingness to face the brokenness, the hurt, and the mistakes we had made, and still believe that healing was possible. In the end, the turning point wasn't a single moment. It was the series of small steps we took, one after the other, toward rebuilding what had been lost. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the way forward is slow, quiet, and full of uncertainty. But it's still worth it. The weeks that followed that conversation with my father were quiet but filled with a deep sense of awareness. Every small interaction felt like a step in a new direction. A direction that I wasn't sure would lead to complete healing, but one that at least held the possibility of it. It wasn't easy. Every day brought new challenges, new realizations, and sometimes new doubts. But there was a shift. The atmosphere in the house was different, as though the weight of the unspoken had finally begun to lift, if only just a little. My father, who had once been a distant, unapproachable figure, started to open up in small ways. It wasn't an instant change, but rather a gradual process, like the slow thawing of ice. He would sit with us at meals, though there was often a quiet sadness in his eyes. He no longer retreated to his study as often. Instead, he would join us in the living room, watching television or just sitting in the same room, content to be near us even if the words didn't always come. I noticed the change in my mother too. The sadness in her eyes had softened, though I could still see the lingering ache. She was quieter and more reflective, but there was also a strength in her now that I hadn't seen before. She had always been the one to hold us all together, and now, in this time of brokenness, she was the glue that began to bind us again. But it wasn't just her strength, it was her vulnerability too. She had always been the one to shield us from the storm, but now she allowed herself to feel the rain, to share in the pain with all of us. It was a slow and often painful process, but there were moments of connection, moments that gave me hope. One afternoon, as we were all sitting in the living room, my father turned to my sister, who had been particularly distant. "I know I've been hard on you," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for that." I didn't mean to make you feel like you couldn't come to me." My sister, who had been silent for weeks, blinked, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. And then, to my surprise, she reached over and put her hand on his. "It's okay, Dad," she said softly. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore." In that moment, I saw the first real sign of healing. It wasn't a grand gesture but a small, simple exchange. An acknowledgement of the hurt. A softening of the edges that had been sharp for so long. My father was finally seeing us again, really seeing us. And we, in turn, were starting to see him. It was a beginning, not an end. I knew there was still so much left unsaid, so much left to heal. But there was something different now. The truth, no matter how painful, had brought us to a place where we could start to rebuild. Slowly, and with a great deal of effort, we were finding our way back to each other. But it wasn't just about forgiveness. It wasn't just about the truth coming out. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about trust. It was about recognizing that, even when things fall apart, there is still a way forward if we're willing to face the mess we've made and work through it together. In the following weeks, the conversations continued. They were no longer as difficult, but still there was a lingering unease. It wasn't as though everything was suddenly fixed. In many ways, the wounds were still fresh, still raw. We all knew that there was no way to undo the past, no way to turn back time. But what we were beginning to understand was that healing doesn't require perfection. Healing only requires effort, honesty, and a willingness to forgive, both ourselves and each other. One afternoon, my father asked me to sit with him in the garden. It was the first time in months that he had invited me to spend time with him like this. The air was warm, the kind of quiet stillness that made everything feel a little more peaceful. We sat side by side on the porch, neither of us speaking at first. It was as if we were both waiting for something, waiting for the other to make the first move, to say something that would break the silence. Finally, my father spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. "About how we've all been hiding things from each other. About how I've been keeping my distance." I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to apologize again, wanted to explain why we did what we did, but I didn't think that was what he needed to hear right now. He needed to know that I understood the depth of what we had done and that I was sorry, not for the reasons we thought, but for the damage we had caused by shutting him out of our lives. I think we were all afraid," I said slowly, trying to find the words. "Afraid that if we told you the truth, it would hurt you. But we never stopped to think about how much it was hurting you to not know." My father didn't respond immediately, but I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. For the first time, I felt like he was really hearing me. He was seeing the things I had been too afraid to say before. "I know I've been distant," he said after a moment, his voice tinged with regret. "And I know I've made you all feel like you couldn't come to me. But I'm not perfect either. I made mistakes just like all of you did." Hearing him say that felt like a weight lifting from my chest. For the first time, I realized that my father wasn't some infallible figure who had never made mistakes. He was human just like the rest of us. He had his own fears and his own regrets, and just like us, he was doing the best he could with the knowledge he had. "I wish I had done things differently," he continued. "But I'm here now. And I want to be part of this family again." His words didn't fix everything, but they were a step toward something real. We didn't have to be perfect. We didn't have to have all the answers. But we could try. We could show up for each other, even when it was hard. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope that we could rebuild, hope that we could heal, and hope that our family could find its way back to each other, even after everything that had happened. As time went on, the small steps toward healing turned into something more tangible. It wasn't sudden, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it was real. The walls that had once divided us were slowly coming down, brick by brick. There were still moments of silence, still moments when the weight of the past felt too heavy, but they were fewer. We were learning to speak again, to say the things that mattered, the things we had avoided for so long. One evening we gathered around the dinner table again. Just like we always had. It wasn't the same as it once was. The laughter, the easy conversations, the feeling of togetherness, it had been lost for a while. But now it was slowly returning piece by piece. My father was there, sitting across from me, his eyes soft, his posture a little more relaxed. For the first time in a long time, he looked like himself again. Remember the last time we all sat down like this? My brother asked suddenly, breaking the quiet with a chuckle. It was awkward, wasn't it? I thought we were all just going to sit in silence for the rest of the night. Everyone laughed, including my father. It wasn't the kind of hearty laughter we used to share, but it was enough. It was a sign that we were moving forward, that we were starting to come back to each other. My father looked around the table at all of us, his gaze lingering on each of our faces. I don't know how we got here, he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But I'm glad we did. I'm proud of you all for sticking with it, for being here. His words hung in the air, simple but meaningful. He wasn't just speaking to us, he was speaking to himself too. He had finally begun to forgive not just us but also himself. He had carried the burden of our secrets for so long, and now he was starting to let it go. It wasn't perfect, I knew that. We were still working through the pain, still finding our way back to each other. But that moment sitting there together felt like a small victory. We were learning to forgive, to understand, and to rebuild what we had broken. And that was enough for now. My sister, who had been so distant for so long, finally spoke up. I'm sorry too, she said, her voice softer than usual, for shutting everyone out, for not trusting that you'd understand. I'm sorry too, my brother added, his voice serious now. I should have been here more. I should have tried harder. It was the first time we had all acknowledged the hurt we had caused and the ways we had hurt each other and ourselves. But the beauty of it was that it wasn't about guilt anymore. It wasn't about looking back and dwelling on what we had done wrong. It was about moving forward, about showing up, about being a family again. As we sat there together at the table, I realized something important. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing the pain or pretending it never happened. Healing means acknowledging the hurt, accepting it, and then choosing to move forward together despite it. It means that even though we had made mistakes, we were still worthy of love, still worthy of connection. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that love again. I felt it in the way my father smiled at us, in the way my siblings reached across the table to touch each other's hands, in the way my mother finally let herself relax just a little. We weren't whole yet, but we were getting there. And that, I realized, was enough. As the months passed, the shifts in our family became more apparent. We were no longer living in the same house we had once occupied, with walls built from secrets and regrets. The cracks had been patched, though not perfectly, and the air felt lighter, freer. It wasn't that the past had disappeared, it hadn't. But we were learning to live with it, to accept it as part of our story, and in doing so we were finding our way back to each other. My father began to open up in ways I had never seen before. He started telling us stories about his own childhood, about his struggles and triumphs, things we had never known about him. It was as if, in his own quiet way, he was finally giving us a glimpse into the man he had always been, beyond the role of father, beyond the protector. He was letting us see his vulnerabilities, his fears, and his dreams. It was in these moments, when he shared these pieces of himself, that I realized how much we had all been missing. One Sunday afternoon, my father and I went for a walk in the park. The weather was beautiful, sunlight streaming through the trees, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. It was a peaceful, quiet kind of day, the kind that felt timeless. We walked side by side, neither of us speaking much at first, just enjoying the simple presence of each other. Finally, my father broke the silence. I've been thinking a lot about how things went wrong, he said, his voice calm but heavy. I've been thinking about the way I shut myself off from you all, and how much I hurt you by not letting you in. I stopped walking for a moment, looking at him. I could see the sadness in his eyes, but also something else, something softer, something that spoke of healing. It wasn't just you, Dad, I said quietly. We all played a part in it. We all kept things from each other, and it hurt all of us. He nodded, as though he had been waiting for someone to say that. I think we were all afraid, he admitted, his gaze far off in the distance. Afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of what the truth might do to us. I thought if I kept everything together, kept everyone protected, I could hold us all up. But I didn't realize how much that was tearing us apart. There was a long pause as I absorbed his words. In some ways it felt like a turning point, like the final barrier had fallen, and we were seeing each other for the first time without all the walls we had built around ourselves. I wish I had let you all in sooner, he continued, his voice quieter now. "I wish I had been more open. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Hearing him say that with such certainty felt like a weight lifted from my chest. For the first time in so long, I truly felt like we were a family again, flawed, yes, but together. We had made mistakes, we had hurt each other. But we were willing to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy, and I knew there were still challenges ahead. But at that moment, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. We continued walking side by side, the warmth of the sun on our faces. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. A chance to heal. A chance to rebuild. A chance to love each other again without fear, without regret. As time moved forward, the healing process became less about grand gestures and more about the small, everyday moments that made a family. We weren't perfect and we still had our ups and downs, but there was a new understanding between us, a new depth to the way we interacted. We had learned the hard way that honesty, no matter how difficult, was the key to truly seeing each other. One evening after dinner, I found myself sitting with my father in the living room. It had become a routine, these quiet moments together, where we didn't need to say much, but the presence of one another was enough. The tension had loosened over the months, and the space between us, which had once felt insurmountable, had begun to feel a little smaller. "Do you remember when we used to play cards together?" my father asked, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I smiled back, the memory coming to me as easily as if it had happened yesterday. "Yeah, you used to always cheat." I teased gently, my voice light and full of affection. He chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard much in recent years. "I did not," he protested, though his eyes sparkled with the same playful energy they always had. We shared a quiet laugh, and in that moment I realized how much I had missed this, the laughter, the lightness, the feeling of being truly connected. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that the hurt didn't exist. It was about finding a way to move forward together, one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, my siblings and I continued to repair our relationships with each other as well. The anger and the bitterness had started to fade, replaced by a more gentle understanding. We were learning to communicate in ways we never had before, without fear, without the walls that had once divided us. My brother, who had always been so guarded, started coming home more often. He'd sit with us after dinner, telling stories about his day, sharing things he never used to talk about. My sister, who had been so angry, began to open up about the things that had hurt her. She started to trust again, to let the walls come down. The conversations we had now weren't always easy, but they were honest. And in those moments, I could see the pieces of our family slowly coming back together. We were no longer perfect. We never would be. But we had found something more important than perfection. We had found the strength to face the truth, to face each other, and to move forward with the knowledge that we were still family. That was enough. My father and I still have our quiet moments, our talks, our walks. And sometimes when I look at him, I'm reminded of the journey we've been on. I realize how far we've come, how much we've learned, and how much we've healed. But most importantly, I realize that, even though the road to recovery wasn't easy, it was worth every step. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be together. And that's what I've learned through it all. The power of love, of forgiveness, and of trying, even when it feels impossible. And in the end, that is what makes a family truly strong. As I look back on everything that happened, I realize how much we've all changed. The family I once knew, the one I thought would always be the same, was gone. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Yes, we had been broken. Yes, there had been pain, confusion, and moments of doubt. But those moments also taught us something important, something that we couldn't have learned any other way. We learned that healing is not a straight line. It doesn't come with a clear beginning or end. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes it feels like it's not happening at all. But every conversation, every small act of kindness, every tear that was shed, those things added up. Slowly, gradually, we began to find our way back to each other. I've come to understand that forgiveness doesn't always come easily. Sometimes it requires patience, not just with others but with ourselves. It took time for my father to open up, to let us back into his heart. And it took time for me to truly forgive myself for the role I had played in keeping the truth from him. But as the days went by, we began to see that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about accepting the past and choosing to move forward together. In some ways, it felt like we had to learn how to be a family all over again. We had to learn how to trust each other, how to share our pain without fear of judgment. But as we worked through the hurt, we also found strength. Strength in the quiet moments, in the shared silences, in the understanding that came from simply being there for each other. The journey we went through wasn't just about repairing what was broken. It was about understanding what truly makes a family strong. It's not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about being there for each other, even when things get difficult. It's about showing up, even when it's hard to know what to say or do. And it's about recognizing that, in the end, the bonds we share are more important than any secret or misunderstanding that could ever tear us apart. I've learned that family isn't defined by how many perfect moments we have together, but by how we handle the difficult ones. It's the hard conversations, the vulnerability, the willingness to admit when we're wrong, and the courage to ask for forgiveness. And most importantly, it's the love that holds us all together, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. Looking at my father now, I see a man who has healed. He is not the same man he was before the truth came out, but in some ways he is stronger. His quiet strength now carries a depth that comes from facing the hard truths, from allowing himself to feel pain and to heal. He has learned, just as we all have, that it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to fall as long as we rise again. As for me, I've learned to forgive, to let go of the guilt, and to embrace the present. The family we are today is different, but in many ways I think we're more real than we've ever been. We've weathered the storm together, and now we're learning how to live in the calm, knowing that we are stronger for it. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the relationships that matter most in your life. Family is never perfect, but it's the love and honesty we share that can help us rebuild, no matter how broken we may feel. Share this story with someone you care about, and remind them that no matter what happens, it's never too late to make things right. If you're ready to face the hard truths, to rebuild what's been broken, and to embrace the power of forgiveness, join us on this journey of healing. Subscribe and let's continue exploring the real, raw stories that bring us closer together.